Pilgrim and the Geometry of Fear by Pandora. Read by Pandora. All rights reserved. Titan proverb: know this, for our species to flourish, the intelligent must take over. Socrates. Chapter 1. Present-day night in the Canadian Rockies. A bright orange flare tore up, renting through the blackness of a bitter night sky in the outback of Canada's 150 square miles of dense forest. As it reached its zenith, it burst bright yellow, showering the sky with a million incandescent fronds, illuminating the dissipating smoke trail from its ascendance and momentarily revealing the dense woodland canopy below. With trees stacked tightly down the slopes of the ravine, there was a brief glimpse of a dark figure laying prone at the river's edge. The meagre light snuffed out, a sudden dagger of light that mushroomed through the dense clouds above, followed by the rumble of thunder, warned of the approaching storm. Baxter was lying on his side as the first sheets of rain hit, bouncing off the stones and shredding through the forest canopy. An angry 10-inch gash was still seeping where his haphazard attempts to stem the bleeding had failed. He allowed the flare gun to drop from his hand where it clanked on the stone, his last hope to live extinguished. He'd done the maths, but couldn't be sure who would get to him first, help, or the wolves he'd heard nearby. His money was on the wolves, because he'd made certain no one knew where he was. He'd accepted in comfort 24 hours earlier the ultimate consequences of his actions, and now that payment was due. He was emotionally and physically exhausted. No chance to get out alone, and only a few minutes left before he fell unconscious due to blood loss, when his remains would be quickly consumed by the wildlife that was stalking him. Maybe luck would intervene. He preferred to hear the words of another human being rather than his dying screams. A searing pain ripped through his body, blocking thought and rendering him unconscious. Fitting in his delirium, Baxter thrashed and grappled with the man he needed to kill. The thorny scrub and sharp rock of the mountain had torn and flailed their clothes and flesh as they'd fought to the death. He couldn't tell if it was his blood or that of his opponent that made it impossible to hold a grip long enough to inflict the damage required to end it. Flashes of facial distortions passed. Now Phelps, now Dreadnought. If he didn't survive, Pilgrim didn't survive, but at least he'd buy her time. There'd been no final monumental effort on his part. His opponent's end had come by chance. As they'd rolled uncontrollably further down the slope, he'd heard the hollowed pop of his assailant's skull as it smashed against one of the jagged boulders. After he hadn't the strength to stand. The inert, now lifeless body next to his was enough for him to remain still. Wiping the cuff of his torn overcoat across his eyes, he lay prostrate, looking up from the bottom of that steep ridge. He could hear the rapid flow of water somewhere below him, the scent of crushed pine, and the prickle of static in the air. An alarm suddenly clanged in his psyche as he saw the figure of a man far above on the ridge. He couldn't be real. It was the trauma that was making him see things. As a flash of lightning ripped through the night, backlighting the black silhouette, the figure unmistakably began its descent towards him. He recognized the gate. Scrambling to his feet in blind panic, he careened down the mountainside. Baxter awoke with a start in the darkness to the bleating sounds of a person in agony. Screams of terror violently awoke him to the fact they were his cries. A monstrous bear with gnarled and knotted scars had its black, bottomless eyes trained on him. It had clamped his lacerated ankle in its jaw as it grunted with the effort of dragging his battered body along the river's edge. The unrelenting rain had created a deluge as a simultaneous crack of thunder splintered the dark overhead. He became deaf to his cries of pain. He wasn't thinking, he was acting on instinct, and his will to survive now outweighed his fear. His blooded and torn hands scrambled through river-worn stones as he unconsciously felt out for those large enough to fill his palm. His ankle, shredded and inoperable, continued to hold as the bear, seeking better leverage, towed him further into the icy water that only the day before had been snow on the Rockies. Baxter felt its glacial swell around his body, saturate through his clothes, and lay its icy grip on his skin. But his resolve was absolute. He wouldn't die without a fight. He'd make the bear work for every mouthful. Baxter hurled the biggest rock he could hold, hitting the bear smartly on the head. Releasing its grip for a moment, it snarled its massive canines in warning as thick flecks of blooded saliva flew from its jaw. With his hands clawing along the riverbed and water covering his chest, he furiously groped, quickly hurling another where it landed with a dull thud. The bear shook its head, reared up, and came down with a terrific splash, causing the water to surge over him. Choking and racked by fatigue, he saw the dense black body lurch forward as it made a jump for his injured leg. Deftly pulling it clear, he began pelting as many rocks as he could. Not deterred by the resistance its prey was putting up, it fell back and began pacing to and fro, knowing wounded prey tired quickly and its hunger would soon be satisfied. Baxter keenly felt the primal inevitability of his predicament and hauled himself further into the river, the bear matching his every move. Unexpectedly, the riverbed shelf dropped away and he floundered for something to hold on to. There was nothing. The swift undercurrent quickly drew him into its depths as, sensing its meal was slipping away, the bear leapt forward, missing him by inches, and plunged headlong into the deep waters where it was washed to the opposite bank. Baxter knew his time was up, but at least he wouldn't be eaten alive. He'd be dead by that point. He felt his body dragged and smashed against the unforgiving granite, but there was no pain. Perhaps his back was broken. In his final moments, his mind took him to L'amethyst. He was sipping a very dry martini with Pilgrim. She was laughing, her dark hair falling in front as she brought her head up and gazed at him. Her blue eyes shone. Life was good.